Дорогие коллеги,
Dear colleagues, thank you very much, our guests, for the interest in our today's panel discussion. It is very interesting. More and more cities today, not only globally but in Russia, based on the demands to our creative institution of Moscow from other cities and from other regions. This topic is becoming very popular. Therefore, we gathering here to understand what creative industry is, what creative industry consists of, what part of economy it is, what request from the cities is in place, what the global industry is. To this end, we have gathered a very interesting speakers. Let me introduce myself. I'm going to moderate today's panel discussion. My name is Evgeny Morinet. I'm director for the Urban Policy Institute, is a part of University for Creative Industries. Today, the University of Creative Industry is going to be represented by one of our speakers. Is the director of this university, is Ekaterina Cherkezadze. Among the speakers, or the first tact, we have two tacts, two approaches, 30 minutes each. Among the speakers of the first act, Alexei Fursin, the head Department of Entrepreneurship and Innovative Development of Moscow. Anton Belov, the head of the Contemporary Art Museum Garage. Vitaly Bykov, founder of Red Cats Creative Agency. Sip Groenwoud, director of the Creative Industries Fund of Holland. Lutz Lysenring, director of Berlin Club Commission. And the second act speakers, which we're going to listen to in 30 minutes, Sofia Tratsenko, founder of the Vinzavod Center of Contemporary Art. I have already introduced Ekaterina Cherkezadze, who is going to join us a bit later, the head of Creative Industries Institute of Moscow. So let's kick it off. We have an interesting topic connected with what creative industry is, what role they play in the economy of the country, what Moscow does to develop creative industries. I would like to ask Alexei Fursin to give an interesting presentation which he has prepared and tell us how important creative industries are for the development of the cities. Since we are at Urban Moscow Forum, we need to see the direct correlation to the special development of Moscow. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Two mics are not working simultaneously. Good afternoon, dear guests. The topic is very relevant. At the same time, new for us, from the perspective of creative industries development of creative industries infrastructure, support of creative industries in Moscow. We've started this activity with analyzing what creative industry is about. There are several theories or approaches what can be regarded as a creative industry. We looked into different foreign practices, foreign projects, which shaped their own approaches to defining creative industries. And we singled out, based on the peculiarities of today's practice, the areas in which we can see we may focus the pool and people working in these industries. Of course, this is the design, this is fashion, this is visual art, this is architecture. We discussed topics connected with the software and IT. and those approaches to these industries. The foreign experts some of them regard this as creative industries. Another question was about the advertising and promotion, because we needed to single out the production and generation of content from those advertising agencies broadcasting this content. Looking at Svetlana, we shouldn't forget about the cinema industry, animation, everything connected with all these things. We regard all these points as creative industry as well. Why am I saying all this? Since further on we need to talk about what is required for this industry, how we are ready to support the creative industry, and how we're supporting right now. First of all, I'd like to mention the point and ask the question, why does Moscow need this? Why do we voice this question? Why didn't we do it yesterday? Only yesterday we had fashion and visual art. We looked into the analysis of 2012-2015, the analysis into how the capitals what the share of GRP of these capitals account for creative industries and how they are growing. I'm not sure how you can see, but it's vivid that Moscow has a low share of creative industries in the whole GRP structure, but we see very huge and fast pace. This is aggregated data for 3 years. If you take a look at the graph, about 36%, 12% annual growth of industries in the economy of the city. And you can see that a number of cities, the shares is going down. We're making a conclusion that it's not due to its decrease in share in the economy, but it has reached the so-called peak point which the industry can generate for the economy. Moscow has great potential, and compared with other cities of Russia, it may be the only city in Russia, the place where people work and where the products are created, compared with all the territory of Russia. So Moscow should tackle this challenge. Why do we focus on the development and support of creative industries? If you take a look at the current range of legal entities working in different industries, more than a million of legal entities working in Moscow, 40% out of them account for creative industries representatives. This is a big sector, and it employs a huge number of people, 10% of the whole employed residents. I'd like to reiterate that the share of the city economy is only 2%. With all these figures, there is a huge potential for the development. And the second point is the question connected with the demonetization of business, of revenue, and transparency of the industry for the economy. And the third point, which is very important, if you take a look at the companies representing this industry, these are the SMEs, and these are not many large corporates. Another important focus in order to develop both entrepreneurship and the economy of the city.
Который важен для нас, это что Another point which is very important for us is that people who work in creative industries, they are those who retranslate urban environments, who retranslate urban cultures, and all of the achievements and all of the achievements of the city. So I think that one of the issues here is that we need to use more movies to show Moscow the way that it is, and shouldn't just use the World Cup or events like this. So creative industries really help us develop tourism and attract more tourists to the city. What can we do today is that we work on a number of initiatives. We support different entrepreneurs who live in the city. We provide subsidies that help small businesses to go on international markets. Another thing is that we provide them an opportunity to market their business on international platforms, to participate in different expos and conferences. We give a lot of subsidies for that, and we also help small businesses to buy equipment that they need to develop the business. We work quite a lot in different conferences, so we work at different expos, and we have absolutely different activities such as fashion weeks or different festivals where we show the achievements of our filmmakers or of our animation studios. So people who work in this industry are very active. We have already planned a number of events as part of expos, as part of the business missions. I think fashion industry follows its mission and has a lot of potential, I believe, to take part not only in fashion weeks in Moscow, but also in Paris Fashion Week. We provide support to Moscow-based designers to come to Paris Fashion Week and showcase their pieces. The export of creative product is also very important. We see that it is not just the growth of the industry overall, but we are witnessing growth in different sub-industries, such as IT or filmmaking industry. That is something that allows us to place a bet on certain sectors and not to spread out our resources. We can actually focus on high priority areas. We also understand that creative industries should take part in the development of urban spaces. A lot of creative businesses work and participate in Moscow festivals. So I think that about sums it up. Thank you very much, Alexei. Well, the figures are quite impressive, and we can see that Moscow can afford to support such ambitious project, and Moscow does support a lot of creative projects. I work quite a lot with creative businesses, and I do see that there is a lot of support, so I do hope that the federal government can expand and build on Moscow experience when it comes to the development of creative economy. But I would like to ask Vitaly Bykov, who is the founder of the first creative industry forum in Russia, G8. What do you think about the development of creative industries in Russia? Do you try to accumulate the knowledge in the current creative environment? Which one of the sub-industries within the creative industries can become recognized internationally? Thank you very much. It is a very important question. Yes, you're right. We did launch a festival of creative industries. It is a large-scale event. We're doing it together with the Flacon Design District. We are organizing an event for 10,000 visitors. So each year we work with several industries, museums, filmmakers, theaters, modern art, advertising, publishing, mass media. And since I mostly work with advertising industry, it was quite a revelation for me how developed all of these industries are and what they're doing in order to gain international recognition. I believe when it comes to recognition, music is probably one of the easiest things to export. I think that the music industry has been developing very rapidly in Russia, but we jumped on this wagon a little bit later than the Ukraine. I think that music industry in Ukraine is developing even faster, but I believe that's what is happening in the music industry in Russia. I think that Russia has made an important breakthrough. You do all know that filmmaking is also quite advanced when it comes to advertising. I think that there isn't much to be proud of. We do not have many subsidies for our advertising industries to participate in advertising festivals internationally, but an advertising industry is a B2B industry, therefore they have to make money to pay their way to international festivals. But I'm going to keep on talking about the music industry, because compared to that, all other industries, creative industries, are not developing as rapidly. It's hard for me to talk about foreign countries, but I think internationally music still leads the way, followed closely by cinema. But thank you very much. We have Sip Groenewald, the director of the Fund of Creative Industries of Holland, and I think, what do you think? What do creative industries contribute to the Dutch economy? How should we develop our creative industries? People from Moscow, people from other cities of Russia usually have the same question. Let's say we have a former industrial area. Let's say we had a factory there back in the day, and we want to turn it into something. What should we start with? What should be our first step? What kind of events should be planned for areas like this? Who can be residents of these creative clusters? Maybe you can share your experience.
Здравствуйте. Спасибо большое for inviting me to tell a little bit about the Dutch creative industries infrastructure. These were quite a lot of questions to answer in 5 minutes that I just heard. But I'll try to explain a little bit what we do with the Creative Industries Fund. We are a national cultural fund, so we are financed by the Minister of Culture. And we focus on what we call creative industries in the Netherlands, which is architecture, design, and digital culture. And what we see more in daily practice is that institutes, but also the creatives from the different universities, when they start their career, they have a more holistic approach, what we call it. So they work together from different disciplines in teams to look at the bigger social challenges like the Sustainable Development Goals and other parts. As a fund, we provide subsidies to these institutes and to these makers. And we give them the freedom to act and to think about what the designer, the power of design can do for their specific project. While saying this, I had to think about a quote of Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General of the United Nations. And he stated a few years ago that when planning cities, public authorities should facilitate a collaborative design process with a broad range of concerned stakeholders that develops a debate around concrete interventions, step by step. Design is the point of departure from which, through debate and reflection, testing and improving, a common vision is reached. And what he means is that from the beginning of planning a strategy for creative industries or urban planning, you need to put together people from different disciplines around the table and design a process. So, as the Creative Industries Fund, we have an annual budget of around 20 million per year from the Ministry of Culture. And we receive 2,000 proposals from the field of architecture and design. These are peer-reviewed, and we select around 600 of them. So both institutes and most of them are individual projects. Also, the talent development program is important because these are the people that make the future. Another instrument that we use as a fund is what we call open calls, in which we encourage the creative industry to come up with new solutions, new ways of thinking on the social development goals. And that's, of course, very interesting. And the most interesting projects and ideas we try to present on international stages, like, of course, here. So, if you look at the infrastructure of the creative industries in the Netherlands and all the disciplines, you can map them geographically where they are based in the Netherlands. But that's not in itself very interesting. It doesn't say that much. Probably also for Moscow you would have a large dot. So before planning this presentation, I thought it would be much more interesting to think about the creative industries, the cultural part of the creative industries, around two axes. So one from research and development to presentation, and one from more autonomous to applied. And you create 4 quadrants in which you can position the individual organizations in creative industries. So in the left top corner, you have institutes that truly question from a more experimental way the technology, art, and society, and the combination of that. They have a freedom of expression, while in the bottom right corner, you have more institutes that function as a platform in which they present the different research and outcomes of projects within the creative industry. So they have a responsibility. For us as a fund, that's interesting because in each of the quadrants we have a different relationship with these institutes. So in the top left corner, we sometimes subsidize up to 100% of a project because we don't want them to be interfered with market forces or anything else. Like in the bottom left corner, the amount of subsidy is much lower, and also we ask different things on what is happening with the end results of the project. So this is an early stage of development of looking at the creative industries in the Netherlands, but it helps. And here you see 4 different organizations in the Netherlands, which you can place in these 4 quadrants. So on the top left, you see Waag Society, which is a research institute that questions art and technology. They were in the beginning of creating the Fairphone, which is now an international success. And in the bottom, you see the Dutch Design Week, which is an annual festival for design in the Netherlands, which attracts more than 300,000 visitors per year, and where general public learns about the power of design and what it can contribute to climate change, the future of health, and all these kinds of things. So, the question how to develop a cultural creative industry infrastructure, you should always keep in mind that the start of it is not gaining a return on investment. You need a really long-term strategy from both an urban, regional, and sometimes a national planning. And to be a healthy environment where the more commercial parties can come in, you need institutes in all 4 quadrants of this circle. And for that to become reality, it is very necessary to think beyond the scope of traditional cultural policy, where you see much more of performing arts and things like that. So that was my short presentation to tell a little bit about the infrastructure.
Сип, огромное спасибо.
Thank you very much, Sib. In relation to this, I do have a comment, and I think that here we have to think about how we can translate this experience into Russia. We have a number of government ministries that work in developing creative industry. We have the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Construction, the Ministry of Industry and Trade, the Ministry of Economic Development. So probably in order to develop creative industries at the federal level, at the national level, we have to create a platform, not just with the participation of this industry, but it should be maybe a bit of a superstructure that will unite these ministries. Maybe we can introduce a federal project, a national project to develop creative industries. And maybe we have to come up with a federal program or a roadmap, appoint responsible stakeholders to understand how to subsidize the development of creative industry. Thank you very much for such interesting information. I would like to give the floor to Lutz Leischering, the director of Berlin Club Commission. Now, what do you think, taking into account your experience, what sort of criteria can be used in order to evaluate whether the development of creative industries has been successful? How can we develop a strategy to facilitate creative industries, because we need to measure how successful is the outcome. How do we measure it, whether we were successful in developing it or not?
Thank you very much. Yes, that's a very good question, which we ask ourselves in the recent years. And I think the most important phenomenon, I think, about creative industries that nobody who works in creative industries says, I'm working in creative industries. They're architects, they're filmmakers, they're musicians, but they're not saying, I'm working in the creative industries. So it's a very artificial way of describing a huge variety of different people. And it's okay if government recognizes this, but I think to really support them and to understand what their needs are, you really have to dive deeper into those different branches. And what we do in our work is that we analyzed that there is a way of creative industries who have a very cultural impact, and some they have a very commercial impact. And you also have to understand that not everything in creative industries is really valuable culturally. There is ways of employing people and making money, but I think to really shape a city and also influence the city when it comes to identification of cities and in terms of being an attractive platform for young entrepreneurs and creatives. As you also said before, Vitaly, that music has a very big impact. Visual art, performing art, literature. But the more you spread this out into commercialization, the less innovation you will see, because the innovations are made in the root of cultural experiences. What we did in Berlin, and we transformed this or transported this also in other cities. We are actually working now in Tokyo, and we last year worked in New York. We said to measure the amount of creative and cultural impact of a city is not really useful to use financial perspectives. So to measure the amount of money is one way, but it's not really showing where are the innovators and where are the creators. So what we did was we creating a study which is called the creative footprint, and we measure the amount of creative space in a city, and we try to keep it in a balance, because cities are constantly changing, and cities and creative spaces popping up and closing down, but nobody's really keeping track. So we wanted to know, what is the creative footprint of Berlin, of New York, of Tokyo? And Tokyo is interesting because they have the Olympics coming up, and 40 million tourists will visit Japan, and you can imagine that with this amount of people, also a lot of the cultural infrastructure will, I don't know if it's going to be destroyed, but it will change. So we have to have a very close eye on what is happening in those spaces. So just to, to give you a little impression, we created 15 criteria with professors from Harvard University and University of Pennsylvania, which showed how is the space when it comes to size, location, age, but also how many events are happening in those spaces. We look at the content side. For instance, is it very live performing happening in those spaces? Is in these spaces working space? Is it interdisciplinary and multifunctionally used? And we also look at the framework conditions, where cities come into place when it comes to funding abilities. Stimulierungsfonds is a very good example of you can support creative industries. Also, the 24-hour licenses that you have the ability of doing events 24 hours in a city is something you introduced in Amsterdam, which is very interesting. In Berlin, we have, for instance, a fund which supports creative space to do soundproofing. So when you have problems with your neighbors, you can actually use money from this fund, tax money, to build different entrance situations, sound walls, to keep the noise in the building. So I think the city can do a lot when it comes to the infrastructure and the framework conditions, but they also have to look deeper into where are the innovators and the creators and who are the ones which are using this, exploiting creativity and making money out of it, which both is good, but you have to know who you want to support.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much. Now the time for the first act is up. And to conclude the first act, I'd like to ask Mr. Fursin on what he has heard. So what is strategy for Moscow next years? The colleagues talked about the long-term development. This is mostly about subsidies, incentives. Talking about the payback period is quite a strange thing. It's very difficult to give the exact quantity of money you can receive. Does Moscow have any strategy for how many years, and what are the major priorities within this strategy? Thank you very much for your question. Based on what I have heard from the colleagues, there are different approaches in different countries in terms of separating the economics and creative part. Not every sub-industry can be regarded as a business unit. At the same time, we see in every endeavor as a unit of economy, and we regard it, the whole industry, through the lens of business component. As for the strategy, it's too early to speak about the comprehensive strategy for the whole industry. I'm totally agree with Mr. Lutz that in order to form the strategy, you need to have a kind of audit. So where we are, what has the potential. It's the idea about the music. It was said that we are quite good at cinema, but the estimates are different. Whether we are good position, we have a good position that we need to do something to develop this industry. We plan this year as a kind of audit year through the lens of the industry and through the lens of the question which has been touched upon, the kind of infrastructure which is required, which should be developed together with the city in order to have the foundation for both creative and economic potential development. Speaking about the next act, which we expect right now, I'd like to focus on specific things which are strategically important for the city. Moscow has sustainable development. It is defined by a number of urban development documents, and there is no single document where you can see the facilities and sites of creative industries. Isn't it a not very important element for the city development, or it's just about terms? We started practice 3 years ago on development of specific infrastructure which has different names in different regions. We call it the system of technological parks and technological accelerators, which have the elements of creative industry, of the creative startups, creative businesses engaged in animation, IT, design, and cinema. I look at Ekaterina and I remember all these professionals. We do understand that within these facilities, the infrastructure gives the opportunity, not the walls, not even the great design, but the environment, gives the opportunity to develop both economic and creative potential. As of today, a trial step, since before we mostly used to specialize in development of infrastructure for technological and innovative businesses, though quite powerful not only on Russian level but globally. IT sector is a part of this industry. Now we switch to a different step when it is necessary to help development, facilitate development of infrastructure for creative industries. I'd like to give you two parts. The first part is connected with those sites and spaces which are of this status as of today. So not stated in the documents, but they are really the creative spaces. And our objective is to help find a solution to all the issues connected with the legal and economical status obstacles. And the second part, as of today, Moscow is actively implementing the concept of involvement in those areas which don't have the function as they used to have in USSR, former industrial areas. And the concept of the city is not to develop and create residential blocks, but to develop the areas with comfortable environment and jobs, space for creative jobs, for creative youth. Every developer, and I do believe that within with this building, you can run into representative of different development companies, having their land resources, which they regard as the entry point for investment, entry point for development. They face the question, they raise the question, what should be implemented, what should be done. And today, in our master plan, there is a platform for such infrastructure development. Maybe it's not going to have the name of creative industry. So it's not about the terms, it's about the nature itself. So this space, this type of space can be developed and can be used. I do believe that if developers find it difficult to focus on the concept of new industrial technological size development, since not everyone understands fully which prerequisites should be provided, but we need to create space particularly for creative industries. It's much easier and it's much more understandable for them. In order to have collaboration with the market of the industry and with the developers, these are several strategic steps. I'm not going to call it a strategy. This is kind of a roadmap for our first steps to take. Alexei, thank you very much for your input, for giving the bridge to our second act. Let's thank our distinguished and prominent speakers, Sip, Lutz, Vitali, and Alexei for very interesting presentations. We would ask our colleagues to take the seats in the first row, and we ask three heads of creative spaces in Moscow, Ekaterina Cherkasade, Sofia Tratsenko, and Anton Belov. Please proceed to the stage. We would ask them to give us a detailed understanding of how Moscow creative clusters exist right now. It's a new approach shaping the plenary session. We also have different tags, a modern creative approach for creative sessions. We're going to have a very interesting forum on smart cities in Yekaterinburg, and we're planning kind of workshop type to invite stars like Evimas. Hopefully he will have time to do that. It's going to be a workshop. They're going to develop the areas in the presence of the audience. So going to be table for thinking, for developing coffee breaks. It's a new format of the discussion. And we would ask Moscow Urban Forum to do the same next year. If it is success in Yekaterinburg, have already introduced our three distinguished colleagues which have joined us for the second act. I'd like to give the floor to Ekaterina Cherkesada. Ekaterina, you are head of the University for Creative Industries. Please tell us, what is, from your perspective, understanding of how the education in creative industries is being conducted? What is the role for these industries in Moscow? What are the support programs should focus on? Alexei has already told us many interesting things. Maybe you have your own understanding to his presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's very interesting and my privilege to participate in Moscow Urban Forum. 4 years ago, so much attention wasn't attached to the creative industries, but it has been of particular interest over these 4 years, both from the city and the business. And it's great that we are talking about that at such high level. From the perspective of education, our university brings together 6 schools: British Higher Schools of Design, Moscow School of Cinema, Computer Graphics Cream School, Moscow School of Architecture, and our 2 new projects which we launched 2 years ago, Moscow School of Music and Moscow of Marketing and Communication. I gave you the full list since what creative industries try to be defined, that's what relate to creative industries and IT as well. The point is that over these 16 years, we've managed to develop several industries which can be regarded as creative industries. Computer graphics, to reconsider cinema. 2013, not many people understood what design was. And in 2003, any person who could work with Photoshop could be regarded as a designer. From the perspective of education, it is important to know that all these people, which are our students, should be integrated into the global context from the very beginning of creative industries, working not for the demands of a particular city or a region. They should be integrated into international processes, and this is a great advantage of them, since in Russia so far, to develop mobile application, computer game is cheaper compared with any other countries. And it can be solved through the App Store, for instance. Of course, our task is to facilitate creative industries being not an elite group which is attached to the cultural group, which has particular specific meaning and which are shaped by the public finance. Creative industries is much wider. First of all, this is about business. And in this respect, the culture is a part of this process. Of course, it is very important to create a right environment, which has been voiced already. These people are constantly learning. In our university, we have the bachelor's program, master's program, professional education, professional postgraduate education. So creativeness is not only an industry, it's a style of life. You change your lifestyle. You leave the office where you work from the morning to the late evening, not maybe on very interesting projects at 30, 40 years, or we already have 45, 50 years old people. You change your lifestyle. Since you become a freelancer, you start to work in different teams. You change your professional pattern and your personal life pattern. That's why people go to us, in order to avoid all the mistakes and not to make them after they finish our school. The creative industry is somehow about ecosystem operation. What is the creative business itself? The business is based on brains, on people, on human capital. In this respect, the task of the creative hubs, creative clusters, universities, which can be regarded as a hub, since it is the combination of professionals, businesses, for collaboration. Overall, this is good communication. This is environment. But on the other hand, it is important to go beyond and to look at the development of creative industries a little bit beyond our regular perspective. You know, in the past, it was like that. You were supposed to develop something, some kind of facilities, and then we were supposed to have some people inside. But it looks differently today. It's often the case when the company moves to the facility where these people are in place. So that might be a little bit swap of roles. So the city, any city, we're not talking about Moscow, we're talking about other cities as well, should have understanding of what kind of creative industries the city can develop and create appropriate ecosystems for the development of this particular creative industries. In this respect, Moscow can be regarded as a vivid example, since Moscow has all the types of companies, but there are many co-working offices. For example, in the morning, we had Natalia Fishman with us, and we discussed Tatarstan Republic, which has a lot of IT specialists. And if it is IT office in Tatarstan, the second office is usually in Tatarstan. I mean, the first headquarters in Moscow and the branch office in Tatarstan Republic. So you should consider that. You should consider that while developing the program of the regional development. So our expertise can facilitate the development, not only the skills and competence of the ground, but the development of the regions themselves. But the major point is we need to help assemble these ecosystems. Where is the public support required? Sometimes you just need to find a spot. In other countries, you can go to the cafe. Cafe can be a place for co-working, for collaboration, for workshops, so on and so forth. In Moscow, it is not the practice, but the creative clusters exist. And we are very happy to help young specialists to be a part of Moscow economy. So Moscow has all the advantages. Thank you for your attention. Ekaterina, thank you very much for your input. ArtPlay is a unique cluster where University of Creative Industries has a pivotal role shaping this creative environment. But it is necessary to mention that this area in Moscow is not unique only by its ArtPlay, by a combination of former industrial areas. And one of the leading part is in development of the cultural approach, the head of which is Sonia Tratsenko, the Center for Contemporary Art Vinzavod. Sofia, which part of art is taken by creative industries? How? I have a very interesting question from the organizers. Maybe I know the answer to that. How can art and creative industries coexist together? So which role do you attach to your industry in all the creative industries which we've been discussing today? Thank you very much for your attention. Good afternoon to everyone. Talking about art in creative industries, we need to talk about the art market as well. This is very integral part because visual art, everything connected with art. We have the Center of Contemporary Art, Modern Art, Vinzavod. We have like exhibits of everything connected with this modern art. I give you one figure. Over the last year, the general overall market of visual art in Russia amounted to 23 million euro. We can compare the figures. Some trillion of rubles, 23 million of euro is a tiny figure. Of course, we have a huge potential to unleash since there is a huge volume connected with all the people, historically educated people.
In this country, children's art schools are still extremely important and they're perceived as so by the society. But it's become a tradition to see art as not being part of a commercial world. When we started working 12 years ago, a lot of people told us that by its very nature, art cannot be commercial. But the situation has changed and art has become part of the market. So therefore, there is still a lot of potential. I still think that there is a small percentage of the art market that we cannot see and is not being realized. Thank you very much. Anton, as the director of Garage Cultural and Art Center, what role do you think your center will play in the development of creative industries? Well, I'll answer this question, but I would like to answer a question that I came up with, especially when I was listening to our international colleagues. I think that they said a very interesting thing. Doesn't matter what we call it, whether we call it a creative industry or something else. Two parameters become extremely important when we talk about this industry. Number one is freedom. Therefore, if Moscow wants to become the leader of creative industry in the world, so we have to make sure that we provide artists the freedom. And, you know, the economy of Moscow makes up 20% of the Russian economy. And the second important point, of course, that Moscow can only be compared to London, Paris, New York, and not to Palermo or Utrecht. So therefore, we should discuss it rather than compare Moscow to other cities. But let me reiterate, if artists feel free, if there is freedom, then that will attract artists to Moscow. When it comes to IT, people know that it's much cheaper to program in Vietnam or in the Ukraine. But everybody knows that when it comes to visual arts and design, it is cheaper to get it in Moscow. We usually plan economic development of any city in the long in the long term. I think we should utilize the same approach for the creative industries. That is something that Moscow is missing. We invite a lot of international experts. They spend 6 months in Moscow and then they can move on. I think that is also very important for the development of our city. You showed us a number of very interesting figures. You said that the growth was by 36%, but I think that the growth of Moscow economy probably reflected the growth of creative industries. So therefore, I think that creative industries are growing as much as the economy. But to stimulate the growth of creative industries, we have to adapt the infrastructure. You know, people are the new oil for this country. People are the capital, and then the contribution of women to GDP is also our new oil, and so we are all living in this economy where everything is a new oil. Therefore, music is our new oil, art is our new oil, and whatever you want. When it comes to Moscow, when it comes to Moscow's art markets, it has a lot of potential. 23 million. This is just maybe 1/8 of one auction at Sotheby's, and just one sale that the big auction houses make will probably be more than 23 million. And Moscow isn't utilizing its museum potential to the full extent. When we are talking about museum potential of any city, if we look at all large cities in the world, museums generate a lot of cash flows, but in Moscow we have this division into private collections, federal collections, urban collections. But I think that would be great if Moscow could see all of these museums as just the museums of Moscow, then can create the infrastructure, then can generate some money flows. Garage Art Gallery is a public Moscow institution which generates cash flows, it generates a lot of foot traffic. Moscow usually reports on how many visitors municipal museums had. As a person who lives in Moscow, I don't really care whether the museums I go to are municipal or federal. All I care is what I get to see. So we have to look at it from a different angle. I want people to come to Moscow not because we have cheap programmers, so cheap designers here, but because when people look at the infrastructure of Berlin, London, and Moscow, they would choose Moscow because Moscow's infrastructure is better. Moscow feels more comfortable. It's a safer city, and it gives them a great infrastructure so they can feel a part of the bigger picture. If we create this infrastructure, we will not need to prove to everybody that we're the best. And then this wave that was generated during the World Cup will just carry us forward. I think that our objective should be that once we create this ambience, people will come, and I think they'll just create the infrastructure, and that'll be probably the largest gift to the country and to the city. Thank you very much. I think you're very right. One of the most important factors for the development of creative industries is this feeling of freedom. It is very intangible. It is somewhere between culture, upbringing, mentality. And to conclude our breakout session, I would like to give the floor to all of the colleagues to try and answer this question. Anton, you talked about freedom, but what is freedom? Especially because we understand that we need government support to develop creative industries in these cities. We all need to work with the governments. We work for the governments. We work with the governments on different projects. And then we understand that sometimes when we do that, freedom becomes a bit of a relative category. So what should we do in order to develop this environment, emotional, creative environment, physical infrastructure? What should we do to have the freedom of creativity? How can people feel free? How do we create free mentality. I understand that this question might come across as a bit of philosophical, but I think that this freedom is something that is currently lacking. Thank you very much for your question. It is excellent. I think that when it comes to Moscow, what we're missing is not just freedom of expression or something along these lines, but Moscow needs a lot more safety. If you look at art play, then you know that quite a lot of rave concerts are organized around the areas, so I get patted down by the police every weekend when I go to work. Therefore, I do not feel safe. And young people go to concerts by taxi, and they go once or twice, but if they're patted down too much, they will just stop going to these concerts. So people need to feel safe. And what is also important is the freedom of expression. We do not really understand what we can or cannot do or say. Therefore, this public tacit understanding of what we can or cannot talk about publicly is something that kills the creative industry. A lot of people leave this country because they lose the sense of freedom within. My colleague said that she is trying to live in her Copenhagen within because she needs to feel free. So I think that we should step out of this freedom within us, and we should try and make it the freedom around us. Thank you very much, Sofia. I think I will agree with what Ekaterina just said about the freedom of expression. We work with modern art, and we understand that it is a bit of a closed format, but we do run into a lot of the problems when it comes to the public perception of art. You probably understand what I'm talking about. Another thing is that we need to create the environment and the conditions that would help people to do what they love doing, that would help artists express themselves and make money doing it. We should create the conditions for people to do what they love doing and make it their profession. I think I probably already said too much, but just to summarize, that's everything that's been said, that, the development of any society follows the development of government policies, and any government is a reflection of society. So it's an issue of our development. But I do want to ask our government a question. They always want to create some sort of events that they can, present like festivals, exhibits, and so on and so forth. But I think we should concentrate on the development of different support mechanisms. It shouldn't be top down. It should be bottom up. I'm not a big fan of all of these Moscow festivals, the Easter Festival and so on and so forth. But we should create a support for people who are working in creative industries. So again, it shouldn't be top down. It should be a bottom up approach. Alexei, what do you think? I think I will try to dodge this question, and I'll talk about a different issue. What Anton just mentioned, that the society is a reflection of the government and the government is a reflection of society. This is a two-way street. We cannot create any mechanism of support if there is no dialogue between the government and the society. what we have today is a barrier that we're all afraid to cross. So this is a barrier between the public and the government, between government and business. Everybody, what did you say? It was the Copenhagen within, the inner space where we feel free. I think that is the wrong approach. We have to foster bilateral dialogue. It should be a two-way street. And another issue which I think is very important is transparency. We need to have the transparency of rules, the transparency of policies, and when we have transparency, we'll understand what the rules are. The rules for creative people, the rules for businesses, and the rules for public officials. I will try to be, though speaking as an advocate, and I would like to, of the government, and I would like to say that not everything we do is just, to show nice figures to our bosses, but a lot of things that we do, actually we do with very good intentions, and we want to contribute to the overall development of the city. We want to achieve real development and not just report on the work that we've done. Thank you very much. I would like to thank Moscow City Departments of Business and Innovations Development. We do hope that our creative industries will develop, and not just in Moscow, but in this country overall. Thank you very much.